Hi, this is Kathy Withers, and I'm going to give you the second installment of the Warty Goblins. If you remember last week, I was talking about having to dye fiber in order to create a colorway that would go with this Warty pumpkin right here. Well, I kind of knew that this was moss green or juniper green, but it wasn't quite dark enough. So I actually went to my dye plot. The first thing that went in was this merino. You could see lots of trash in it. It's got shades of green going throughout. What I actually used, if you're a dyer and you're interested in knowing, is I use the Dharma acid dyes and Country Classics. And the color I started with was avocado. Well, excuse me, not this one. This one here was moss green, because that's what moss green looks like. And I added black to the dye pot because the moss green that I was looking for turned out more this shade than the darker shade that I was looking for. So this was actually the first thing that went into the dye pot. It's 100% merino. Gorgeous, gorgeous fiber. Of course, lots of itty bits of trash in it, so I'll be spinning that one myself. But the first thing that you put in the pot is going to absorb a lot of dye very quickly. So as quickly as I could, I added more color to the pot, and I ended up, the second bat or roving that I had ended up being shades of darker green with lighter green, and that's actually what I was going with because I wanted it to match, or at least come pretty close to this other Warty Goblin pumpkin that I have here. Since I'm kind of into aesthetics and what can be used, if you have too much of that yellow in it, most people are not going to be able to wear it, and so I didn't like that as an idea. So I didn't add yellow to my dye pot. I figured between the green and the black I would get it. When I use black, if you're using fiber that has not been has not been wet right as you put it in, the colors are going to split. And the first color that's really going to show up most of the time is a shade of red. So the green and the black have tinges of red in it, which kind of pick up other colors. But I went with the second roving that was in there, and this one is a merino Shetland, not quite as nice as the merino, but it holds its texture beautifully. It's great next to the skin, and if you look at it closely, you can see that, let me see, the problem here is always trying to get it with the camera going. You can see that there are little knots in it. So they're spaced approximately 16 to 20 inches apart, and they kind of mimic the texture of the pumpkin itself, with the little lumps and bumps. So this was kind of a cool one to spin, a total of 155 yards, which is kind of prodigious for me because in order to get that 155 yards, you've got to spin like closer to 300 to get it. So that was that one. Then higher up in the pot was another roving that mimicked some of that one, the other one there. But this one here had a lot more yellow in it. And because of the way the roving looked, I decided it would be great to use to create the super coil. So because the fiber was partially felted already, it drafted beautifully to make the coils, but when you wash it, things kind of slide around a little bit. So they felt to each other a little, but they don't quite have the texture that my traditional super coils do. But that's okay, because the nice thing about this is that you can take these fibers and slide them to where you want them to be, and then when you're knitting, you pop the super coil out to the side that you're going to consider your outside, and it goes back to being a super coil. And then if you didn't want to do that, you can just knit along and you'll end up with thick and thins, coils, and then super coils. So you get 3 for 1 in that one. And when you spin this one, you end up for sure with only a third of what you spun initially to get the color. So this one here kind of mimicked it too, but in a lot larger, bulkier way. Then higher up in the pot was this one here that had a lot more yellow in it. And then this one here picked up a little bit of the red that was in the black, and it kind of goes throughout. So it's really kind of cool, but it didn't actually go with the pumpkin that I had selected. Now, lest you think things always go great, I kind of wanted to show you something else. So I don't know if you remember that I told you that I was spinning this yellow here. And it actually looks a lot closer to that color in real light than it does here. The problem is that, and it looks really cool, but the reason I have 2 really short skimpy skeins is, number one, I wasn't sure how the thick and thin would look super coiled because it was a slightly pilly fiber. I had to pick it all out, and I was just wondering how it would end up looking. So I didn't commit to spinning an awful lot of it. Well, you'll see that I have 2 skeins, and the reason why is not my spinning, although I didn't like these, so I wasn't, I decided I wasn't going to commit to doing any more of it. But the yarn that I used, and this is not actually it, the thread that I used to ply it with was a shade of yellow, kind of like this, and it looked gorgeous until I tried to pull it off the skein winder. And remember, I don't know if you remember, I said that I like to use mercerized cotton. Well, that one was not a mercerized cotton, and what ended up happening is that the fiber just split. And I mean, so I went and tried more of the fiber, and you could just lightly tug it. It would be maybe okay as something to crochet with. But the problem is that it's so fragile that you give a slight tug, and even with my hand spun next to it, just kind of reinforcing it, it broke. And so I picked up the fiber and tried to break it, and boy, did it break pretty quick. So that yellow thing, even though it was designed for weaving, has hit the trash can because I don't need stuff like that. It doesn't work. And then the last thing I wanted to show you was my 2 blankets. I've been working really hard. These are fall colors, and this one here I started over a year ago, and the cool thing about it is how open some of it is, and then how tight some of the rest is, and that is totally a function of the yarn. I finished weaving in all my ends, and then I did the twisties at the bottom on both sides. So today this one is going to hit the wash, not to be dyed, not to be felted, but to be fulled. So it'll open up the fibers, so it'll kind of close up some of the holes, and it will make it a fluffier, warmer blanket. So that will end up in the wash today. This one right here, which I absolutely love, is kind of what I call a weighted blanket. And I actually used, except for 1 or 2 skeins, the exact same colors that I used. Actually, I think they all are the same colors that I used in the other one. I used the leftovers, and of course I raided my stash for a lot more of it. But the cool thing is I used a size 13 needle for the entire thing, and you can see how lacy some of it is because this was lace weight, and then how full the heavier yarns were. So this here was a thick and thin that I plied to a cranberry colored, but they're all shades of fall colors. This reminds me of the leaves in the woods before everything kind of comes down. So I still have ends to weave in, but that will be done today, and then it will go in the wash. And I'm kind of excited about it. This is the time of year when I start going through my stash, looking at my unfinished projects and starting to finish them up, because I always feel guilty at the end of the year with how many unfinished projects I have, and they're quite a lot. My biggest problem is that I kind of have ADD. I can design something, but when I've totally figured out how it's going to be, all of a sudden I totally lose interest in it. So it's a struggle for me to actually finish things. And so now towards the end of the year, I kind of use my time to finish things up. Before I leave you, I wanted to remind you that this weekend is the Maryland Alpacas and Fleece Festival, and I am a member of that group. And on Sunday morning from 9:20 to 9:40, I will be doing a live presentation. So if you haven't seen shots of my shop, you'll get an opportunity to glance at that. And my shop is opened on Fridays and Saturdays from 11 to 2. If you let me know and it's kind of outside those hours, I'll certainly wait in the barn for you to come down, because fondling the yarns is a happy thing. And before I close, so it's Withers Wool. I'm on witherswool.etsy. And if you think you're hearing some funny noise in the background, I'm in an old barn with a tin roof, and what you're hearing is the rain coming down. Nice soothing sound until there's a storm, and then it's not so nice. So signing out. See you next week.